Morning. Kok suaranya kayak capek gitu ya, lelah. Good morning everyone.
Morning.
Once again I would like to say thank you for the participants and also the speaker from our friend from Bersih and also Lente and Anfrel to join with us on this two-day events. So first of all, I would like to apologize on this morning until lunch. We will use English because we have a friend from Malaysia, from Bersih, and also we have ASEAN Network for Free and Fair Elections, ANFREL, and also we have the Legal Network for Truthful Elections to share their experience about how to advocate on electoral reform on their own countries. Especially as we know, this morning sessions we have Kohin and also Briza and also Ona. Kohin will tell us about how the prospect on electoral reform in Malaysia. So the electoral reform issues not only is in Indonesia, as we know that after elections, after 5 years, so there is the discourse rising up on Indonesia to change the electoral system. But also it happened in Malaysia, I think. As we know, Malaysia Bersih as one of the NGOs, CSO, who leading up on advocating electoral reform to strengthening democratic in Malaysia. And the second session, we have Ona Karitos from Legal Network for Truthful Elections. Ona will tell us about the experience to advocate to minimize the state abuse resource in elections. Ona advocating on the regulations and also hand in hand with the elections commissions to minimize the behavior of the elections participant to use the state resource that make elections not or unequals. And on the third sessions we have Briza Rosales from ASEAN Network for Truthful Election or ANFREL. In the beginning of this year, I think you come to Indonesia also to observe the Indonesia elections. So you can share to us about the funding related with the election violations and malpractice, not only in Indonesia, because we have big elections in regions. So you can share to us what your funding during the missions of election observation, and also tell us how to make some electoral law enforcements to minimize the electoral violations. Okay, we will start with the first speaker. We would like to invite our friend from Bersih. We have Kohin and also Ashraf. You will share the podium together to present related with the prospect and advocacy electoral system reform in Malaysia. So Kohin, the podium is yours now.
Terima kasih, thank you Heroic. Selamat pagi semua. Now I feel like the White House spokesperson. BBC any question je. Selamat pagi semua. Jadi hari ini Ashraf and I will be presenting about the electoral system reform advocacy and prospects in Malaysia. I'll do the first half and then Ashraf will do the second half. My colleague Ashraf has been the longest serving Bersih staff for 6 going to 7 years, and he will have plenty of experience to share, so that's why he's also co-presenting today. I'm aware that a lot of people in this room today and yesterday are mostly interested in Indonesia, so let's just focus on taking the potential comparative lesson ataupun what we are trying to do in Malaysia, and let's just try to compare the journey between Peludem and Bersih. I think that will be very insightful lesson, hopefully, cross exchange knowledge between our two organizations. Okay, can I control this one? Okay. So, one thing that people have always said right now is electoral reform or electoral system reform even necessary in Malaysia right now? Because we have had multiple change of government. Everyone has been part of government. Every party has obtained power before. So, why need reform? Our argument is elections becoming more competitive doesn't necessarily mean elections are becoming fairer. It's not the same thing. every party has a better shot at obtaining power, but systematic inequalities remain. For example, malapportionment has gotten worse. So malapportionment means the size of the constituencies, and where in Indonesia maybe that's less or not a problem at all because of the proportional representation. But in Malaysia, you have, if you, depending on where you are registered to vote, your vote value could be 10 times smaller or larger than another person who vote in another constituencies. Yeah, so yesterday, actually I remember I was sitting here and some speaker was saying, oh, if you do away with PR, first past the post, single member district, you might solve some problem. We were like, okay, so gender representation remained poor. After almost, okay, my math is bad, since 1957, almost 70 years, we never have members of parliament women more than 15%. Never. Not even, people are saying 50% or 30%, not even half of that. Never more than 15%. And voters have no say in local government and Senate appointment. The Senate, both are appointed, not elected. So you can see that this is not fair. Just because at the national or state level election are more competitive, it doesn't mean it's fair. Okay, this is the results of the general election in 2022. As you can see, I think we are being political fragmentation is more of a phenomenon now in Malaysia. In terms of advocacy and prospect and the scope of electoral system reform, I think we have progressed in some ways. When Bersih was formed in 2006, it was mostly focused on combating cheating or electoral fraud, where there were widespread concern about phantom voters or people voting multiple times and stuff like that. But I think the discourse have changed and developed so much that now we are talking more about substance, and we'll go through that later. But there are also many missed opportunities. We have scored a few wins, but major reforms remain outstanding. So there are two different perspectives. Some will say, oh, nothing has changed at all since 2006. Some will say, oh, we actually scored some wins, but we miss out on certain major reform. And in the context of this, what is electoral system reform good for? I think there are three objectives when we advocate for electoral reform, system reform in Malaysia. There are three objectives that we are trying to meet, but I'm aware they don't always, they can conflict, they can compete, these three objectives. So the first objective is fairer votes ataupun vote value, or POVO lah, one person, one vote, one value. Inclusive representation, so that means gender representation, but also dari segi geographic and regional. Stabilizing multi-party democracy, and this is a question that I will ask later again. Okay, Bersih from street to parliament, so basically, I think you can see Bersih is best known for organizing 5 major rallies or protests in Malaysia to demand clean and fair elections. But after the first transition of power in 2018, actually, a lot of strategies have changed because the political environment have changed. So the tasks that were assigned to Bersih for this presentation is prospects and advocacy. So this part is about the advocacy. Maksudnya, sebelum 2018, our leaders can't even enter parliament. Some of us were even blacklisted. But after 2018, each parliament sitting, we were there to, let's say, brief the parliamentary committees, engage with ministers, members of parliament. Some of our members are also appointed to the Electoral Reform Committee that were formed by the Prime Minister at the time, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. And this committee actually was the best bet for major electoral reform. But unfortunately, as I will explain later, when they finish their study, when they finish their consultation, everything, there's a change of government in 2020 and we missed the political opportunity structure. Kalau dalam political science kan, POS, we missed that period. The new Prime Minister was not interested and he made the report a state secret. So you can't even share the report, even though we actually know what's going on, but we can't share it. So it's quite unfortunate in that sense. So mixed results, I would say, in lobbying for legislative and policy reform. Okay, we'll go into that in detail later. I think as Ashraf will show later, you know, before 2018, although people always say, oh, the Bersih still exists after 2018. Before 2018, we only got one major policy wing, which is You know what it is? The government only listened to Bersih for one thing before 2018, indelible ink. So before that, we don't have the indelible ink in Malaysia. So that's one of the Bersih demand. That's the only policy win from before 2018. But after 2018, we managed to score a few policy wins, although we were less visible, publicly visible, because you have to do work behind closed door and everything. Okay, some of you might know about Undi 18 AVR, which is automatic voter registration. This was passed after 2018 and gazetted before the 2022 general election. And actually, although this is a good thing, because when you lower the voting age, a lot more people they have the right to vote. But because of the distribution of voters in Malaysia, these two legislation combined, they actually made malapportionment worse. In all but 2 states, when you look at here, malapportionment has gotten worse. That means the difference between the largest constituency and the smallest constituency in each state, kita banding ikut state, not just comparing the small state and the big state, but we look at in each state what is the biggest and largest. Okay, I'm trying to sell the stake here because a lot of people are interested in Indonesia only, but I'm trying to say pay attention to Malaysia as well. Of course, there's the domestic importance, which is the logic of first past the post electoral system. Everyone knows about the Wages law and all that. But proliferation of political parties in Malaysia, which is multi-party democracy right now, can first past the post accommodate that multi-party democracy? Because according to what we know about the law, it is not. It creates two-party system, right? So if the logic follows that if indeed first past the post cannot accommodate multi-party democracy, you are seeing a very volatile winner takes all political competition in Malaysia, which makes for unstable political instability. Because everyone wants to be in government, everyone is afraid of being in the opposition because you have much less resources, you might even get persecuted. Sounds like our neighbors share some similarity here. Everyone don't want to be the opposition anymore here. Internationally, I would say there's 2 strategic importance of Malaysia's democratic transition, which is Southeast Asia lacked a successful democratization story in 30 years. The last successful democratic story is Indonesia. But of course, there are some regression here and there. But we look at what happened in Thailand and Myanmar. There were some hopes, but regression. So Malaysia is right now like kind of in a fluid environment. It's still vulnerable, but it has the potential to be the next democratization story. And of course, as a Muslim majority country as well, I think there's a lack of successful transition model, especially after Tunisia and Arab Spring. So it's worth paying attention to Malaysia in that sense because we lack that success story for some time. Okay, there are 2 broad categories that we are trying to cover here. We don't have to go into detail, I think, because of time, but we'll be happy to answer that later. So I'm just going to focus on the first one, which is electoral system reforms, and Ashraf will do the second one. Okay, electoral system reforms. I think one of the major things that we have been trying to do is trying to introduce proportional representation. And we are not talking about complete change from first past the post to PR. In fact, Ashraf and I were just talking. Actually, surprisingly, Bersih tak pernah release satu report khusus untuk electoral system. Because you were doing so many things, you are combating fraud and all that, you don't really pay specific attention to electoral system per se, but it's always there in our many recommendations. And in fact, I don't think we have developed one common house position. We are content with just tweaking the system here and there. So whether it's MMM, mixed member majoritarian, or mixed member proportional, actually at different times, Bersih have advocated for these 2 different positions. But I just want to share, remember the Electoral Reform Committee that I talked about? So it's quite a high-level committee formed by the Prime Minister. So it has that backup by the state, right, to do all this. And I think for the first 2 years after the transition, 2018 to 2020, Bersih key leaders were in the committee, and we spent a lot of time advocating for change. And this was our best bet for major electoral system. I think this part can be said publicly because this chair, he go and mention it to the media, so I guess it's not secret anymore. What this committee proposed is Parliament become proportional representation, subnational legislature, the state retain first past the post. So this was the recommendation by the committee. Of course, that is not Bersih's position because when we joined the committee, there are so many different actors. They have to develop a consensus. Okay, like I explained earlier, we suffer from, in terms of bad timing. We put in a lot of effort and resources into the ERC, but by the time it completed its work, the Sheraton move happened, where the defection of several MP caused the government to collapse. The new leadership was not interested in electoral reform, and in fact, the report became classified as state secret. Okay, prospect for change. Big change. Right now, Anwar Ibrahim's unity government is not interested in overhauling the electoral system. There might be room for incremental and experimental change, which I'll explain earlier. Okay, remember when I said that Bersih, we don't put our eggs in all one basket. So this is the recommendation by the ERC, right? Actually, another idea that we are trying to macam inception plan in the political leaders' mind, and then they will think its own idea, which is fine. We just want to see the thing done. You can have potentially seat increase. Right now we have 222 seats in Parliament. Let's say you add 100 seats, and that 100 seats become for proportional representation. So you have a mixed system. I think actually we have heard from some inner circle that the political leadership is entertaining this idea as well. So we hope that we can continue to engage them on that. So that's one role of Bersih since 2018, which is to macam provide agenda setting atau thought leadership, right? Because these things, maybe they don't know that you have such option, mixed system. Because Malaysia 70 years, you only live in one system. So our job is to sell them ideas, and then if they are interested, we can provide them with more details. So, okay, when I say about incremental and experimental change, this is also about mengambil peluang, as Ashraf said, taking opportunities. Okay, for example, right now there is a almost borderline separatist sentiment, but quite nationalistic, I would say, in Sarawak and Sabah, Borneo. Some groups, not all, they're trying to advocate for more rights for Borneo, right? And they want to have 1/3 seat in Parliament. Bersih's position is that is not the right thing because it will worsen malapportionment. Right now, Borneo, Sarawak, and Sabah, they have 17% of population, 17, but they have 24% of seats. If they get the demand that they want, which is 1/3 of the seat in Parliament, it will be double to 34%, right? So it's not equal in terms, it's not proportional in terms of your seat number and your voter number. What Bersih and other NGOs such as Project Sama propose is they can have that for Senate. So if you are seeing the game that we are trying to play here, which is we actually want electoral reform at the Senate level, but we are tapping into a local grievance, which is the Sarawak and Sabah states, right? But we link it to electoral system reform. We say, okay, if you want your greater representation, let's have it at the upper house, which is Senate, currently unelected. So we say, let's elect them and reserve a certain portion for Sarawak Sabah. So you can have your veto power there. So that's one way of pushing for Senate election. Okay, another one is local election. And a few of us were discussing yesterday. There is one topic that completely was not mentioned in yesterday's, 10 hours of forum yesterday. What is the elephant in the room that was not mentioned? Anybody? No? Philippine specialist, do you sense something that was not mentioned yesterday? Maybe Indonesians, they don't feel it as much, but I don't know. No? So in Malaysia, electoral reform ataupun electoral system reform, there's always one topic that always come up to mind when you talk about this electoral reform, which is ethnicity, race. yesterday, there was no mention of race ethnicity. Maybe it's embedded or implicit, I don't know. But in Malaysia, it's highly linked to ethnicity because, for example, this issue, local election. Yeah, we don't elect our mayors like you do here. We don't elect our local councils. We did in the 1960s, but then it was abolished. So basically, there is an ethnic subtext behind electoral reform. For example, clearest is local election. The traditional assumption, past assumption, is a lot of ethnic minorities such as Chinese live in urban areas. Urban areas are more populated. So if you have local election, the Chinese will control the cities. So that's the assumption. The Chinese will control the city and the place with the most budget, blah, 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 blah. So that is why, even though this party is for local election, as you can see here, their own minister in the cabinet say, it's not our priority. And of course, this UMNO minister as well, she came out immediately and said no DBKL election because she was worried whether her base will rebel, right? It's something that Bersih is trying to frame it more productively because actually due to urban migration, the ethnic majority of Malay have occupied and are occupying major cities as well. So you have looking at the largest parliament in Malaysia, for example, Bangi, is Malay majority seat. It's no longer a Chinese or non-Malay seat. Shah Alam, the capital of Selangor, is a Malay industrial city. So we have been trying to push back against this angle of don't link ethnicity and election reform. Okay, another way we were trying to link it is by, remember what I showed you earlier about this thing? So now we are trying to frame it from ethnicity to youth, because a lot of youth voter, they are allowed to vote, right? 18 to 21 years old. So there's new category of voter, and most of them are studying or working in urban areas. So Bersih's role here is to frame it from ethnicity to youth angle, so in a way that malapportionment is affecting the youth. Okay. Next, gender quota. There was Linda here yesterday that was talking about this, right? There is some push as well by our allies. Basically, there are several suggestions. One is for political party to nominate at least 30% women candidate. So this is a campaign for voluntary party quota, right? This one here, the Kinabalu Declaration for Women Only Additional Seat, it's actually a sub-national reform campaign, in the sense of they are trying to make the state, for example, you're supposed to hit 30% women representation. If you don't hit it, the state has the right to appoint additional elected representative. It's like in Singapore, they have nominated MPs and so on, right? Okay, I'm aware of the time. Okay, we advocated for recall elections, such as done in Taiwan, but we settled for anti-hopping law due to the Sheraton move lah. But I think it's better than nothing, because anti-hopping law did save Malaysia from the chaos after the hung parliament in 2022. Okay, last one in electoral system is basically we want to reinsert actually a constitutional clause that says there is a maximum limit how much the constituency size can differ. Just now I explained to you, dia boleh 500% voter size different. We are trying to say no, you can deviate, but you must have a maximum deviation ratio. For example, 33%, plus minus 33%, right? So we have tried to work with lawyers and everything, even state government, to stop delineation that is very unfair and unequal. Okay, I'll pass to Ashraf for quickly walk us through the procedural reforms.
Terima kasih Kok Hin. Thank you Kok Hin. Good morning to all. Selamat pagi semua. So I try to be brief also. I think my slide is quite long, and I think some part of it are very technical. So I'm going to focus on electoral procedural reforms. So like Kok Hin said, before, why Bersih exists, or why we, the civil society, establish Bersih. Firstly, because we want to combat election fraud. So there are many issues. regarding phantom voters, like there are misuse of government resources during elections. There are rampant use of government resources during elections. So these are the main issues that people can connect to, right? Phantom voters, people voting many times, and the federal government are using and announcing new projects like every election just before elections, right? Even 2 or 3 days before the polling day. So that's why we are focusing on more technical procedural reforms. And also when Bersih are deliberating what sort of policy, what policy that that we need to prioritize, that we need to focus on. So we are thinking like, we should pick or we should prioritize a policy that that can be agreed upon on all political spectrum. We are between the opposition and also between the government, and also a more lower hanging fruit of reforms, right? Yeah. So these are the procedural reforms that we are trying to advocate for. The first is the election laws. Lebih khususnya adalah the Election Officers Act, and then political financing, and also the election commission appointment process, and also lastly to improve our voting accessibility. Right? All right. So for election law reform, we are focusing on to amend the Election Officers Act. So we have 3 laws that govern the election in Malaysia. The first, of course, the Constitution. The second is the Election Act, and then the third is the Election Officers Act. So most of the campaign process, campaign activities are under this Election Officers Act. But the Election Officers Act actually is very outdated. It was last amended in 2003, if I'm not mistaken. And it has very unclear, ambiguous definition on certain major offences. If you read the law, the act, for example, for the letter for the offences of corruption, it's like a very long paragraph of sentences, and the political parties or the candidates, I don't think they have never read letter by letter, right? So they are always giving money, giving foods during the elections, because the offences are not that clearly spelled out that this is wrong, and also that certain offences are not covered under the law. For example, we don't have any laws to prevent abuse of state resources, to prevent the government to use the incumbent to use the government machineries during elections. So what Bersih done is, under the Electoral Reform Committee that Cohin mentioned just now, so we engaged with almost all the major political parties in Malaysia for a period of 2 years. So we proposed amendment of the law, and we prepared the amendment for the Political Officers Act, the amendment bill, the Rang Undang-Undang, RUU. So some of the major reforms that we try to advocate is to introduce the new offences such as abuse of state resources. We want to make it a mandatory audit for election expenses. So now the candidates can spend in elections, and they will just submit a report that just under the maximum campaign expenditure. So we want them to audit their election expenses and then submit to the election commission. And we push for more power to the election commission. So our election commission is very toothless. They cannot even fine the offenders, beri hukuman denda kepada pelaku kesalahan pilihan raya. So we want at least they can at least give some fine to the offenders. So that's for election law reform. So for the EC appointment process, so the issue with the appointment process of our election commission is they will be appointed by the king. So Malaysia is a constitutional monarchy. So the election commissioner will be appointed by the king as advised by the prime minister. So basically, it was appointed by the prime minister. The prime minister will select who will be in the commissions. So there are no transparent process, there are no parliamentary oversight, and also there will always the question of the election commission impartiality and independence. I have 3 minutes. Okay, so Bersih, we produce a term of reference to the parliament. Okay? We even present it to the prime minister, so that they will have some sort of vetting process before the before the election commissioner can be appointed. So the prime minister need to submit the names or the candidates for the commissioners to the parliament before submitting to the king to be appointed by the king. So that's for the appointment process. So we hope that by this process, the parliament, which has like which have a voice from the opposition and also the government, that can vet before selecting the candidates for the commissioners. So we submit our memorandum to the Prime Minister just on February, bulan Februari of our, we call it reformasi 100%, right? Yeah, because he's the one that always melakukan reformasi, right? So we submit the memorandum to him. Okay, to increase access to voting, we have many issues in voter accessibility. For example, we have many issues on postal voters. So there are very poor management of postal voting. For example, some of the postal votes arrive in the postal voters' house after the election end. So that's the issue. So they are not entitled to vote because they cannot send their ballots to back to Malaysia. And because of that, there are a lot of lack of trust to the EC. And there's also a problem of out-of-region voters. For example, if I'm staying in Sabah, but my father is in Borneo, but I work in Kuala Lumpur, so I must go back to Sabah to vote. I cannot vote in Kuala Lumpur. So we are proposing to amend that so that the out-of-region voters can vote in Kuala Lumpur and the ballots can be sent back to Sabah. So that will like reduce the cost for me to go back and to have to spend more money to go back to Sabah. Okay, so advance voting is like we vote 3 days before or 3 days before the real polling day. So it will memudahkan, right? Assisted the out-of-region voters because they won't have to go back and spend more money just to vote, right? All right. This is one of the incidents. Some of the incidents in regarding the postal voters issues. So Udipus belum diterima. This is 3 days before the elections, and they are staying in England, UK. So to transport back the ballot will take more than 3 days, right? And the election will end. All right. Next, I think this is final one, political financing. Okay, so for political financing, for now we have no laws to regulate political financing, and we have minimum law to regulate campaign finances. The only law that regulate campaign finances is in the Election Finances Act. That's only the Act only stated the limit to spend in the elections. For example, for federal election, the campaign limit is 200,000 ringgit, probably 6 juta rupiah. Yeah, so there's only minimum law to regulate campaign finances. So what Bersih try to do is we try to build a network and finding allies in CSOs and also MPs to push for this. So we have to form an all-party parliamentary group, APPG, on political financing. So with this APPG, we are producing a proposed bill of law, orang undang-undang, on political financing, which Kohin also part of the secretariat of the APPG. But of course, belum lagi. This is not a successful story. The bill is there, but it's not pushed back. It's not being tabled yet in the parliament. And also, I think government also, the federal government also have their own version of political financing bill. So this is the APPG. We also meet some of the select committee in Parliament on electoral reform. So this is to conclude my presentation and Koin presentation. So after 2 decades, what have we achieved to fight for reforms? So some we have achieved, some we have only partially achieved, and there are more outstanding reforms for us to fight for. For example, after 2 major rallies in Kuala Lumpur, you only managed to, the government only implement indelible ink in GE 13, not GE 14. And then, of course, anti-hopping law. That's why these political parties across the spectrum are supporting this amendment because they are greatly affected by it. So we managed to have an anti-hopping law. And partially achieved, like we have, after the GE 14, we have a more inclusive election commissioners. Now, usually the election commissioners are from the public servants, right? But now we have a more inclusive, more diverse commissioners in the election commission. We have an activist as a commissioners. We have 2 academicians in the commission, so it's quite okay lah. And then we have managed to expand the postal voting. Before this, postal voters, Malaysian who resides in Thailand, in Kalimantan, in Singapore, they cannot vote by postal votes, but now they can in 2021. So there are more outstanding reform that yet to be, we yet to see the change, such as the mixed electoral system. We want a fair delineations. We want to reform appointments of the election commissions. We want political financing. These are all on the table, but yet to be implemented or being prioritized by the government. So far, there are no electoral reform usaha usaha for electoral reform. Sorry, I cannot translate there. Usaha, sorry, Briza and Ona. Okay, so this is the lesson learned. So both mass because Bersih start as a political people movement, so we mobilize people on the streets, right? But after GE 14, after the first transition of government, we see that both mass collective action and mobilization and high-level elite lobbying has its place in advocacy strategies. Sometimes we need it, people movement, people mobilization, but also sometimes we need to talk to all political parties, all the stakeholders. I mean, just for agenda setting and for thought leadership. You want to feed, you want to influence the agenda setting for the political reform in Malaysia. And also, we should maintain connections, build new political parties. If I'm not mistaken, Pak Jayadi yesterday, he said that probably we need an ally in DPR, right? I'm not sure how the situation in Indonesia, but because Bersih, before 2018, we fight with the opposition. So now the opposition some of the opposition are in government now. Some of the opposition remain opposition. So we actually have friends in both of the spectrum of the political spectrum. And I mean, this is Kohin putting positive spins on ethnic framing. Kohin really knows how to sell things. Yeah, he's a best salesman in Bersih. So putting positive spins on ethnic framing and geographic and regional interest. So ethnic issues in Malaysia is like very important issues, very like fundamental issues. All things are like will be connected to the ethnic and also religions, yeah? Islam and Melayu. Alright, I think that's all from me. I mean, we can open to Q&A. Terima kasih ya. Habis masa ya?
Both of you should stay there.
Oh, yeah.
Because Indonesian people doesn't want. Okay, thank you. Once again, give applause for Ashraf and Kohin for the great presentations. A lot of lesson learned. I just want to make some clarification. The ERC is come from the parliament or it's from the independent people like GSO academic?
So the ERC is formed by the government actually.
Okay,
Formed from the government. The composition is mostly from the political parties,
okay,
but I think only there are like 11 members, if I'm not mistaken. 7 are from political parties, 4 are from CSO. For example, I think Brazil has 3 members there, and 1 more I think from academics.
Yeah, I think it's good listener yeah, for Indonesian because when we advocate the elections law, it just from the parliament, from the political parties. GSO like us, we just advocate outside the parliament. Yeah, sometimes even though we got the invitations from the parliament just only for the hearing, after that they work themselves. But I think it's good role, I think, to advocate for Indonesian, yeah, make hand in hand with the parliament inside the committee to electoral committee. Okay, everyone, you have any questions related with the presentation from Kohin and Ashraf? Please. Mas Yos, please.
Hello, Kohin and Ashraf. Thank you for sharing your experience and with Mercy. Just wondering, so you mentioned that you have allies or you've been accepted by the parliamentarians in both aisles, right? Some of them are still opposition and some of them were former oppositions. Just wondering what were their reaction to your proposals? What are the difference between the two camps? And I just want to understand what are the incentives for them to align with your proposals? Because as far as I understand, when they are opposition, they have incentives to change the law. But when they are in power, there's no incentive to change the law. And is there any like connection between you mentioned grassroots movement or between their constituents and their position in the parliament? So I just want to understand what are the incentives and how might we shape the incentive for the parliamentarians to align with our proposals? Thank you.
Should
Yeah.
Should we answer first or we take? Probably we take first.
We take, okay. So anyone? Is there any questions? Riza.
No, just curious question. What's the appetite of the election commission right now? Because you captured our interest, regional interest. What's the appetite right now of election commission with regard to inviting international observers when it comes to elections? Thank you.
Okay, is there any questions? Baninis?
So Bersih is a social movement organization, and you've done so many rallies in Malaysia. My question is, talking about election yesterday from morning to afternoon, we talk about very technical issues about parliament, about concurrent election, simultaneous election, and you also share about how you advocate on boundary delimitation. It's very technical issues, I think, and also in Indonesia. How do you make these technical issues become a public issue so it can be a public awareness? For example, here in Indonesia, talking about political finance, when we talk about increasing state budget for the political parties, so many rejection from the public because public said political party is corrupt, political parties is not transparent. And how do you make these issues like this become public awareness? That's my question. And also yesterday we also have a discussion on institutionalism perspective or behavior perspective. And I think Bersih do both of them. You do advocacy, policy advocacy, and also do for the grassroots how you balancing these two perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any questions? One more? Okay. Okay, maybe you can answer first.
The first question is on how what's the level of acceptance, right, from between the oppositions and also the government, and how we shape the incentive for political reform or for electoral reform. Alright, so probably the best answer is like this. Like when Bersih starts, right? So there are three major opposition parties that are joining us. One is PAS, Parti Islam Malaysia, and then PKR, Parti Keadilan Rakyat, and also the DAP, Democratic Action Party. So they are the opposition back then. And after 2013, the 13th general election, PAS sort of like break from the opposition coalition, so they are like on their own. But the AP and PKR, they form with another splitter party, Amanah. Amanah is from PAS. So, but they also the opposition until 2018, when Pakatan Harapan, the Coalition of Hope, wins the election. So then they are in power, right? So because of this, Bersih sort of like network with them, yeah. But previously, I'm also one of the political party members, so we have like more connections, and then we try to leverage that connections. But after 2018, we also try to talk to the new opposition, UMNO, the former parti pemerintah, right? And it's a hard thing to do because we always criticize them, right? Until they blame us, they blame Bersih because they are lost in elections. But the first political party we meet is UMNO, because we know for electoral reform, we need to talk to both opposition and also the government. So we know the government then, probably they are the reformist government, so they have appetite to change the system, to reform the system, to reform the election, or to reform the institutions, right? But we also realize or recognize that the reform also must take into account what are the opposition's stance, or we need the opposition to be also agreed on the electoral reform. If not, it will be ditarik ke isu perkauman, right? And also isu keagama. So we need Bersih sort of like want to teach the opposition how to be an effective opposition. So we meet UMNO. So we fit all this agenda of electoral reform. And also, for example, we want to introduce laws on abuse of state resources. Because previously, the opposition, before 2018, so they always complain of the government abuse the state resources during campaign. But now, after 2018, we don't want that to be repeated again, right? So we need also the new opposition to criticize the government if they also repeat the same offense, right? So that's the level playing field that we are trying to create, and that's why we talk to the opposition and also the government, so that they are in agreement of what sort of reforms that they can agree upon to create that level playing field for all, for a more fairer political competitions, right? So that the incentive, so that all parties can compete at the same level without the government have advantage against the opposition. I think probably that, yeah. Oh, kau nak tambah? Oh yeah, I think boleh right. I think there are other issues lah. For example, the Constituency Development Fund, right? Pertukaran untuk wakil rakyat. So we also try to advocate for that. So this sort of reform that we need, all parties agreed, but of course when they are in power, biasanya tak bagilah. Right? Okay, so appetite to invite international observers. Unfortunately, I think the current election commission, I'm not sure if they have been talking about this. I mean, to allow international observers. We also at Bersih, we only accredited by the election commission after 2018, right? Before this, we cannot observe the elections. We cannot go into the polling stations. We only observe from the outside, wearing yellow vests, right? But for international observers, I think there are also some pushback, not from, probably from the election commission, but from other stakeholders. I mean, that's sort of like limit because if there are international observers, it perceived as foreign influence on the election. I mean that's the issue lah. All right.
Okay, I think let me add on a little bit lah. I think yours, your question about incentive, he already jawab about the reaction kan. So the incentive, right? Let me put it this way. If you follow Malaysian politics, you know there's a push for memorandum of an understanding MOU between government and opposition. So this was done during Ismail Sabri's time with the then PH opposition. Now they're trying quote unquote to do that between this current government and opposition. Okay. The electoral reform agenda is not moving anywhere at this point. But what Bersih is trying to do is, okay, the opposition want equal constituency funds, which Ashraf mentioned, because opposition MPs are now being discriminated. They don't get the funds to develop their area. So that is what the opposition want. The government may or may not want to do electoral reform, but they are scared it may get backfire because of the ethnicity angle. Because right now the opposition is largely conservative Malay Muslim nationalists, so to speak. The Prime Minister, from what we have heard, is concerned that if he passed through delineation, it might be a trigger for ISET 2.0. So if you follow Malaysian politics, the first Pakatan Harapan government sort of fell partly because of that anti-ISET rally, where there was a strong pushback by conservatives against the government for trying to rectify the International Convention on elimination of racial discrimination. So Prime Minister is concerned that if delineation is done, it might be satu peluang lah, opportunity for his political opponent to frame it as erosion of Malay political power, right? Where Bersih comes in is, we are trying to say strategically, incentive for both of you, opposition demand for equal CDF, government demand bipartisan collaboration on electoral reform. So you have a bipartisan committee, both have your fingerprint on electoral reform. So at least the government is not going to shoulder the political capital alone, right? If this goes bad, at least opposition won't attack them publicly for it, because opposition have a say in this delineation. So that's where the incentive, in terms of incentive, where it comes in lah. I also think it's not just a matter of which party, as you mentioned. It's also, I think, ada generational perbezaan juga. Sebab this parliament, especially opposition, banyak first term MPs. I think like more than half first term MPs in the opposition bench. So this brings us to our and often underestimate skill in civil society work, which I'm sure Indonesia as well lah. This is really relationship building. Right now, I would say 50% of our engagement in parliament is made possible by just 2 or 3 members of parliament who is really keen on reform, and they always convene people, call civil society, call their other MPs, then have briefings. Just 2-3 people. But you cannot rely on the same 2-3 people all the time. You need to build new allies with this new group of people, and that is where I think a lot of work still needs to be done, because a lot of the otai activists, the old activists, they are already 50, 60 years old. In a way, their generation's political power may be swaying down. You need to build new base, new political allies. I think you already answered Riza's question. So Nini's question about technical issue becoming more public concern, kan? I think this is something that we struggle with as well. So there's 2 decisions you need to make, I think, at least we try to make also. One is, you need to decide when do you need the public attention. Dia macam Alah, you pegang that glass of water, you pegang it, this light. But if you hold it for 5 minutes, your hand so you can't hold public attention forever. And you cannot always exercise that leverage because no one stays in the news cycle for 24/7, 365. So you have to decide when do you want that public leverage. One example from Bersih in terms of political financing that Ashraf shared, we actually didn't embark on a public campaign first. We worked at the elite level, MPs, because we didn't need to understand what is political financing and how it works in other countries because they don't have the time to do research. So we do the research. I think it will take almost half a year juga, and then after that we lobby them and try to train and all that. And then bila segalanya tak jalan, bila ada progress, sudah ada draft bill, it works at the committee level, but then it's not moving, and then only we embark on a public campaign. And we actually produce a mini documentary about political financing. It's of course less view than the dirty vote video that was mentioned yesterday. That one berapa million view dah. But it was quite successful in the sense that it reached a large public audience in Malaysia and it dapat media coverage. So then public pressure put the agenda back on the spotlight. So you have to be strategic about when you want to do it. Apa nama? Okay, lagi satu is I think the second decision is I think it's something that Ashraf and I think we started as a Bersih participant, right? Macam dulu protest movement kan. We were like the public level, but now we have doing this work for so long, so we take it for granted that people knows what we are talking about. So that's another problem, the knowledge gap. When we talk about delineation, they don't even know what is delineation. Right? Nak sebut perkataan apportionment pun susah, kan? So we have to meet them where they are. I think that's a very important decision that we try to make each time, although to varying success. Meet them where they are, because for us it's so tempting to say this is the right policy. We know already how to solve it, but we have to sort of take a few steps back and meet them where they are. I just share one story. We work now with a comic illustrator, so we just got some funding to produce comic illustration to talk about reform. So when we work with this comic illustration, she will ask some very basic question and try to distill it in a way that people can understand. And although it was frustrating for us at first, but we acknowledge lah the result. So she was right. Simple storytelling. Okay, I think that's all.
We still have time? 5 minutes, maybe one questions? Is there anyone questions? Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Herti. I'm from PPDI, Association of Indonesian People with Disabilities. Before you mention about person with disabilities, and my question is, how the effective Bersih can support person with disabilities to give their voting or their participant in electoral? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think probably that's the last question. Okay. Alright, so I mean, topic on disability also like a new topic for us actually. Yeah. So I mean, I think we met one group from Indonesia. I forgot its name actually. So they are like advising us on what to do to advocate for a more accessible voting for the disability groups. In 2021, we actually had a town hall with almost 60 organizations from 60 disability people with PWD's group in KL. So we asked a list of our recommendations to the government, to the election commission, but unfortunately there are only minimal change on the voting process for the people with disabilities. Yeah. We try to push for it actually. Almost all our election reports we will include a section on how to improve voting accessibility for the PWDs. For example, to have prepared a ramp right in the polling stations, not to place the polling streams like a classroom at the first floor or the second floor, because there are incidents where the polling stations for the disabilities on the first floor, right? So they need to like, we have a procedure called undi tumpang, so they can vote at other polling streams, but it will really take some time, really chaotic, right? So we try to advocate for that, and also we try to advocate for sign language in the polling as a polling staff, just to be ready if there are like people with hearing disability, and just to help them understand how they vote, and which is their polling streams. I think we are only like minimal advocacy for the disabilities, but we have our friends also, our connections for the disability groups in Malaysia, and they are also like pushing us to be more inclusive and try to prioritize more on voting accessibility for the PWDs. Yeah, I hope that's answer your questions. Okay.
Okay,
Alright.
thank you.
Okay.
Give applause to Kohin and Ashraf. Thank you for the great presentations, excellence. So we can have learned a lot with the Bersih how to advocate the electoral reform, but not only for the electoral design, electoral governance, and also the accessibility for disabilities people to make our elections more accessible. Okay, for the next sessions, I would like to invite our young researchers from Prudem to moderate the next sessions. Haikal, please.
Okay, thank you, Mas Oik. It's quite hard than a previous day because I have to use English today. I hope my English is good enough to you to understand. I have to stand here? Okay. Yeah. For this session, we will talk about abuse of the state's resources. Like we know in 2024 election, the issues about the state's resource abusive is become increased, and in Indonesian cases, our constitutional court has been called that there are loophole in our legal frame about how to prevent the abuse of the state's resources. So now we have a speaker from Philippines, Ona Caritas from a legal network and for truthful election, or LENTE. Ona will tell and share with us how to regulate the abuse of the state resources, especially in Philippines and in context of the regional in Southeast Asia, and how we should set the regulation to prevent the abuse of the state resource on election. So without further ado, give applause for Ona Caritas from LENTE.
Good morning. Are my friends at the back of the room still okay? Good morning. Good morning. Yeah. They're not listening to the instruction. I said at the back of the room. They said good morning. Again, good morning. Thank you to Ninis and to Perdudem for inviting us, inviting LENTE to talk about our work back in the Philippines and to share our experiences on monitoring as well as advocating our government, more specifically our election management body, to address the problem of ASR or abuse of state resources in elections. But for my presentation this morning, my presentation will have two major components. I'm actually setting my timer because I tend to speak a lot, as my friends would know back home. So I need to limit my presentation to 40 minutes. I'm working on my timer now. Okay. So for this morning, my presentation will have two major components. I know I need to present on ASR, but I also want to share our effort and our learnings through the years on pushing for electoral reform before our parliament and before our election management body. So that's the first major component of my presentation this morning. I would want to share on our experiences in pursuing electoral reform. Then the second major component is on our work in addressing and monitoring ASR, because
To be honest about it, we're fairly new in monitoring ASR as well in the country, in the Philippines. We've started to monitor ASR or abuse of state resources in our 2022 national and local elections. So we will learn from each other. We will not claim to be experts in monitoring and pushing for reforms to address ASR in the Philippines. So hopefully we can have a discussion, a lively discussion after my presentation, which will end in 38 minutes. Okay. Okay, so again, I'm from LENTE. LENTE stands for Legal Network for Truthful Elections. Next slide. There's a clicker. Okay, thank you. Next slide, Ona. There's a clicker. Okay. So LENTE, it stands for Legal Network for Truthful Elections. From the name itself, we are a legal organization. So LENTE is composed of lawyers, law students, paralegals, and other trained volunteers, or as we call them, paralegals, to monitor elections in the Philippines. We are a fairly young organization compared to other election monitoring organizations in the Philippines like NAMFREL or PPCRV, whereas we were established in 2007, just before 3 years before we first fully automated our elections in 2010. So as some of you might have known or might know, we've been using machines in our elections for 14 years already. So we've been using machines for 6 or 7 major elections in the country. And we are an election monitoring organization, so just like BERSI, like Perludem, we are engaged in the usual election monitoring organization activities like public education, networking and partnership, lobbying and advocacy. But we've always claimed that ever since we adopted this development entrepreneurship approach in pursuing electoral reform, we've always claimed to also be an electoral reform organization back in the Philippines. Next slide, Anna. So this is what we do. Because we are a legal organization, and the Philippines, as you know, has a very vibrant civil society organization, especially election monitoring organizations. But what we've realized and recognized through the years of working in the space is people know how to vote. They know how to shade the circle beside the name of the candidate. They know the values to look out for in candidates. But the vacuum or the limitation in the knowledge of our of Filipinos in elections is their knowledge on election laws. Going back to Nini's question earlier on how to simplify our work, because sometimes it gets too technical, like Risa, like Cochin said earlier, it gets too technical. So what we do in LENTE is to simplify election laws. People don't like to learn about election laws. Is that your experience here as well in Indonesia? People don't like boring stuff. Is that correct? They don't like boring stuff. So part of our work in LENTE is to simplify the law, to simplify what's boring in our elections, and make it more understandable and palatable to the people. Of course, we monitor the elections, but we always say to our audience that election monitoring is not a one-day event. It's not just monitoring election day. Election monitoring is monitoring the 3 stages of the electoral cycle: pre-election, election, and post-election. And a lot of people would always ask us, and most probably this question is also asked to BERSI and Perludem, what do you do in between elections? You're not doing anything in between elections, right? But we always tell our friends that most of the work that we do is actually happening in between elections and not just election day. So we monitor the elections, but we try as much as possible to monitor all the stages of the electoral cycle. We are not a big organization like BERSI or Perludem. We are a small organization, but to maximize, to amplify our efforts, we partner with like-minded organizations and like-minded individuals. Basically, our criteria is every partner should be non-partisan or not supporting any candidate or political party. And lastly, we conduct purposive and systematic monitoring. Being a small organization, we really can't do it all. Like Pikachu, you can't catch them all like Pikachu. So LENTE, being a small organization, we do purposive and systematic monitoring. So for example, in every election, We monitored the accessibility of elections. That has always been one of the corner work or cornerstone work of Lente in the Philippine elections, monitor accessibility of elections. We started monitoring ASR in the 2022 national and local elections and our village elections as well. We monitor how our election management body, or COMELEC, or Commission on Elections, implement election-related laws in furtherance of their mandate in the Constitution or our primary law to hold the election. So this is what we do in Lente. Okay, and this is our network. I started out with basically explaining Lente as a legal network. So our base of operations are law school chapters all over the country. So as you can see at the left side of this slide, these are our law school chapters. So we want to get future lawyers to be volunteers of Lente so that before they're part of the legal organization formally, we imbibe them with the values and principles that we feel that they need once they become lawyers in the country. And I don't know if this is the same feeling in Indonesia and in Malaysia, but in the Philippines, one of the major problems is political dynasties. Yes, we have elections, and in the ANFRA report, they describe Philippine elections as vibrant. But one of the major problems in Philippine elections, honestly, for the past 10 years is the lack of competitiveness. The same faces, not my face, the same faces, the same names run in Philippine elections. And as much as we conduct public education activities, as much as we push our people to vote for the right people, for the right candidates, if our people just see the same faces and the same names every election cycle, every 3 years, then basically nothing would happen and nothing would change in Philippine politics and Philippine elections. So we started also venturing in youth political participation work because we realized that nothing would change. Our work would not matter if in 10 years from now or in 2 decades after we start, 2 decades into what we're doing, we'll still see the same names and faces. So we started also building youth coalitions all over the country to somehow, encourage more young people to take part in engaging more closely with the government, especially the local government unit, and hopefully encouraging them to run in Philippine elections. I don't know if this is the same case in Indonesia and in Malaysia, but in the Philippines, there was a nationwide survey, and young people were asked if they are interested to run in Philippine elections. And you know the answer to that question? Does anybody want to guess the answer to that question in the survey? If Filipino young voters or Filipino youth would want to run in elections or in politics. The answer to that question survey, to that question in the survey is almost 75% of young Filipinos do not want to run in Philippine elections. Actually, they do not want to engage with the Philippine government, with Philippine politics. They're allergic to working in the space because they feel that that's not me, that's not my life. Some people are used to that life, but 75% of young Filipinos do not consider themselves as politically active or will not see themselves as engaging in the space. So I think that's actually the common problem in the 3 countries that are present in this session and yesterday, because we are really talking amongst the crowd. We are preaching in the choir, but just like the question posed by Ninis, again, how do we reach out to people outside of our circles, outside of our spaces? So that's one of the evolution of Lente. From being a pure election monitoring organization, we've ventured somehow slowly into actually also building future leaders, hopefully future leaders that we could count on or that we can see in Philippine politics 10 or 15 years from now. And unlike other NGOs in the Philippines, if you talk to NGOs or non-governmental organizations in the Philippines, because of what happened during the Marcos time, the first Marcos presidency, martial law, if you talk to a lot of, especially the old NGOs or the old non-governmental organizations, when you ask them how do you like working with the government, most of the time they would answer that they don't like working with the government. They feel that it's dirty to work with the government, and that's the usual actually sentiment or the attitude of non-governmental organizations. It's dirty to work with the government. It's okay to remain in our space, but if you work closely with the government, are you being part of the government, and are you becoming a dirty non-governmental organization? And I think that's also one of the problems in Philippine civil society space, Philippine civil society space, because a lot of NGOs are doing good work in the Philippines, but because they limit themselves to just working in their space and not working closely with the government, their good ideas are not translated to policies and programs of the government. So, later we work closely with our government, especially our election management body and our parliament, because of our electoral reform work. So, and we also work with other government agencies. Like, for example, we're pushing for better transparency in government. So we're working with the Freedom of Information Office. We're working with OGP, Open Government Partnership, because we're pushing for transparency. And to get more transparency in government, you need to work with these government agencies. We're also looking at elections from a human rights perspective. So we're working again closely with our National Human Rights Institution or our Commission on Human Rights. We're also working on governance at the local level. So we're also working with our Ministry on Interior and Local Government. So in relation to all our aspects of our work in Lente, we will always identify counterpart government agency that we could work with to further our cause, to make our work more effective. And for everyone's information, the BARM region, I don't know if you're familiar with the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao, it transitioned to a parliamentary system of government, and we're working closely with this transition government because they will be having their first parliamentary elections supposedly next year, but our parliament is again postponing their parliamentary elections next year. But we're working closely with this parliament to work on their Bangsamoro electoral code, because they have their own electoral code, because they have a parliamentary elections different from the presidential elections. But I'll talk about that work more later. Okay. Who is that handsome face in the slide? As everyone knows, he is Duterte? No. Who is this person? Of course, Manny Pacquiao. When I go to countries, not only in Asia, but actually in Europe or in, for example, in America, most of the time people would ask me, how is Manny Pacquiao? So I think Pacquiao is the most famous Filipino all over the world. That's why I inserted his picture in this slide. So just to give a bit of a background about the Philippines, we have a presidential form of government. We have 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, and judiciary. We have constitutional commissions, so they're not part of the 3 branches of government, so they're independent. So part of the constitutional commissions in our primary law or our constitution is the Commission on Elections, or our election management body. So we call it COMELEC. The Filipinos, we love initials. That's why we have COMELEC, we have Lente. It always stands for something. So COMELEC, it stands for Commission on Elections. We also have one autonomous region in the country, and I mentioned this earlier, it's BARM, or the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. So that's Duterte, no, that's Pacquiao. So don't forget the face of Pacquiao. He's running again for our parliament. He's running again for Senate in the Philippines. Okay, so just to share, electoral reform to us before was just like attending hearings, submitting our positions. Whenever there's an electoral issue in the Philippines, that's how we do electoral reform before. This is electoral reform for us. Submit position papers, attend hearings. And most of the time, this is the policy reform of most NGOs or CSOs in the Philippines. But for us now, electoral reform is going beyond attending hearings, the formal hearings in Parliament. submitting position papers, because part of doing electoral reform is actually doing the dirty work, meeting them where they are, meeting them outside of the halls of the parliament, talking to them where they are located, and basically doing their work. What do I mean when I say doing their work? When we do electoral reform in Lente, we will always have draft bills, draft EMB resolutions, because we feel that if we will just be submitting position papers, most of the time they will always tell us, we have lots of work to do, but we will consider your suggestion. But most of the time when they say that, they will not consider our suggestion. Is that correct? Most of the time. So, right now, when we do electoral reform, when we say doing electoral reform, in Lente, it means that we have a draft bill, we have a draft resolution. So that's how we do electoral reform. But before we arrive in that draft bill or draft resolution, we do all of these meetings. We do all of the FGDs, SGDs, HGDs, whatever GDs that you can think of. We do all of that. Because that's part of our work as well as ESO. We need to be as inclusive as possible, as consultative as possible. So we do all those kinds of group discussion to arrive at the draft bill and the draft resolution. You might be wondering, we are a dictatorship in Lente, but we are not. Well, I'll tell you more about the process on how we arrive at a draft bill or a draft resolution. But if you take a look at that picture at the right slide, that was me 10 years ago. A thinner version of Ona 10 years ago. So that was me talking to our ally in Parliament, talking to our champion in Parliament about a bill that we were pushing for poll workers in the elections. And we were strategizing. I just want to share the story of this picture. This picture.
Yeah.
There.
You can point.
You know, Lente is poorer than Perlude. We don't have a pointer like this. Di ba, Brisa? We have a human pointer. Next slide. We don't have a pointer like this. Ladies will get angry at me. Okay. Okay. So, at this picture, let me just tell you a quick story about this picture. When we were pushing for a bill for poll workers, there was one parliament member who was continuously opposing the passage of this bill. So we were talking to this member of parliament. We were strategizing. How can we remove this so-and-so person out of the picture so that our bill would be finally heard at our House of Representatives? So what our parliament member champion did was, okay, let's do this. When he goes to the toilet or to the comfort room, that's our sign to call the bill for voting. And lo and behold, thank God for toilet gods. This parliament member went to the toilet, and this was the time our champion, our ally in Congress, asked the person in charge of voting that, okay, let's hear the bill now. So our bill, fortunately, was able to hurdle that stumbling block because that person went to the toilet. So you can't do that when you don't have allies or champions in Congress, when you don't have connections. Because when you just have formal connections, they will always just say, okay, noted, we already received your position paper. But if you don't have any personal connection or that rapport or relationship with your champions or allies, most especially in Parliament, you can't talk about strategies like that. Strategies outside of the rules, strategies outside of the playbook. Okay, hearings, meetings anywhere, FGDs, SGDs, never-ending statements. So our formula for pushing for reform basically is, we have universe of reforms, but we always use this formula. It should be technically sound, so it should be well researched, but at the same time, although it's technically sound, and NGOs like us, we do good work. We produce technically sound proposals, but at the end of the day, If the proposal is not politically feasible, it will not be acceptable to our members of parliament, to our election management body. No matter how good our proposal is, how perfect it is, how it would change the elections or the politics in the country, it would not see the light of day. Why do I emphasize that? The political feasibility criteria, because most of the time NGOs like us, we operate in, this is a good proposal. They should accept this proposal. There's no reason for them not to accept this proposal. But remember, we're not the only constituents of these members of parliament. Our interest is not only the interest that they have in mind. So whenever you pursue reform, I think you should always consider, we get this, we're used to this. Produce technically sound proposals or recommendations, but you should also consider if the reform is politically feasible. Okay, so how is a reform technically sound? Are you familiar with this person, with this cartoon character? This will tell your age if you're familiar with this cartoon character. Who is this cartoon character? Goku. So Goku was a cartoon character, early 90s, mid 90s. So I think you were the same generation. You're not agreeing that we're the same generation, huh? No. Okay. So how is a reform technically sound? So first, it needs to be transformative. So it needs to affect not just one component, for example, of the elections in your country. It needs to affect as much as possible all the components of the elections in the country. So it needs to be transformative. So it needs to be Son Goku, from a Saiyan to a Super Saiyan. And it needs to be institutionalized. So most of the time when we talk about reform, you need it to be part of the legal framework or part of the resolutions or policies of your election management body, because that's the only way that we are assured that the reform that we've worked on for a long time would still be part of the legal framework in the next election cycle. So it needs to be institutionalized, whether in a new law or a revision of an old law or through the policies or resolutions of the government agency that we are working with. And lastly, it needs to be scaled up. So just like what I mentioned earlier, it should not just be implemented by one government agency. It should be implemented by the whole government or in the whole country, for example, to define scale. So, and how is a reform politically feasible? I think this is the hardest when you talk about reform. It's technical work, again, we're used to that. But for a reform to be politically feasible, we always describe it as when the stars align. Yan. Why do I say that a reform to be politically feasible, the stars should align? Because most of the time when we do reform work, it's not acceptable to our parliament. But sometimes big rallies happen. Revolutions like in Bangladesh happen, and that there's that space or that once in a lifetime opportunity that groups like us can introduce reform in the space. That's what I mean, and that's what we mean in Latin when we say that reform is politically feasible when the stars align. So we just need to be ready about it. Our reform may not be accepted now, but maybe something would happen in the next few years that the reform would be politically feasible or acceptable now to the parliament if the parliament composition change or the composition of the election management body. I just want to share on the reform that I was talking about earlier. You know, this reform, this has always been perennially filed in our parliament. The Election Service Reform Act. It started to be filed 2000. And every 3 years we have a new parliament. So 2004, 2003, 2006, it has always been filed. So it's a pet bill of some members of our parliament, but it has never seen the light of day. It has never been passed into law. But when we started working on ESTRA 2013, or 13 years after it was originally passed in our parliament, fortunately for us, the stars aligned. Some members of our parliament, our election management body finally said yes to opening up the space to other members of society aside from public school teachers. So we managed to get this win, the passage of this bill into law 3 years after we started working on it. Okay. So that's how we define how a reform is politically feasible. Let me skip VSO and the barn because I only have 3 minutes left. Okay. So let me just talk about ASR, or our work in abuse of state resources monitoring. Just like what I mentioned earlier, this is not old work for us. We started just working on this problem 2022. And what we did in the 2022 national and local elections is basically get the lay of the land. Because just like vote buying, ASR is an accepted problem in Philippine elections. People, when we ask them what they think about ASR, they would always tell us that, it's advantage of the incumbent. That's part of Philippine politics and elections, that you're lucky that you're an incumbent. So you get to use the resources of the government. You get to use the personnel of the government for your personal campaign. So that was the landscape when we started monitoring the 2022 elections. And if you Google actually ASR, Philippine elections, there's not much literature on it. Please, cooperate with me. Get your phone. You have internet access, right? You have load. You have internet. So please Google ASR, Philippine elections. I just want to show everyone how the landscape was in Philippines before we started working on this problem. If you Google ASR, Philippine elections, you can only see Philip Lente. So that was the lay of the land when we started working on the space. Nobody was working on it. There was no literature actually present when we started working on the ASR problem. So what we did was deploy long-term observers before the start of the campaign period for our local candidates for 3 months. We deployed at the start of the campaign period and a month after the election day ended. So we monitored the effect of elections and ASR after elections. And what we saw after the 2022 national elections was people did not care much about the problem. So from that finding was in our second reiteration or second monitoring of ASR in our village elections last year, part of our goal was to make people care more about the problem. Make people more aware that it's not part of elections, that we should not accept it as just part of elections, that it is a problem and it is an election offense actually. It is a crime in our legal framework. It's unfortunately not a lot of people are talking about it as a crime because it has been accepted as part of Philippine politics and elections. So if you can take a look at this triangle, this is our work since 2022. We will advocate for people to care more about the problem, for our election management body to care more about the problem, but we will monitor. And in our monitoring, it will feed into our policy work. So we've worked on policy since 2022 on how to better address this problem of ASR in Philippine elections. And okay. So how did we monitor ASR for the 2023 village elections? So we had different reporting mechanisms. We had an accountability reporting portal. If you check out the website of Lente, we have an accountability reporting portal. Our monitors, our observers can submit their reports, and at the same time, the general public can submit their reports on ASR. We also made use of our Lente email as a reporting platform, our social media pages, and our hotlines. But on election day and pre-election, post-elections, what our monitors used was Kobo. That was the tool that we use for our monitors, that they can report their ASR monitoring and their interviews as well with identified stakeholders. We also made use of our existing pro forma affidavit. If ever person would like to make a report or would like to make a complaint before our election management body or our security forces. And these are the types of reports that we receive in these different portals. Most of the time, we receive general reports of like campaigning, of this so-and-so person campaigning. But in relation to ASR, abuse of state resources, these were the reports that we receive in these portals. Apple Watch, or basically bansos, of candidates making use of the distribution of social welfare programs and them being present in the distribution of the social welfare programs. So we receive reports like that. We also receive LGU intervention, meaning LGUs are making use of government infrastructure like village halls for their campaigns, making use of government resources like their printers, making use of government personnel for their campaign. And for the village activities, this is also basically making use of the different government resources for their electoral advantage. So these were the different reports that we received through these portals. These portals, and these are the reports. And just for everyone's information, let's like what I mentioned earlier, we have an old election code in the Philippines. It's 1985. It's a 1985 law. So it's an older law. It's an old law. It's older than our 1987 Constitution. But since 1985, ASR has always been an offense in our legal framework. For example, it's prohibited to release, disperse, or expend public funds during a specific period, during the 2 weeks before the election day. It's prohibited to construct roads during the campaign period. It's prohibited to use public funds for government or election campaign. And of course, it's prohibited to engage in vote buying and vote selling. So what am I saying? Is that ASR has always been a problem and recognized in our legal framework. But because of the attitude of people, the attitude of candidates, the attitude of our election management body, that it's part of Philippine politics and part of Philippine elections, people will just say to us, is it a problem? That's why we're really happy that we started working on ASR, because it basically actually reignited our interest to also address this problem of vote buying and vote selling. So these are the ASR reports that we receive for vote buying, vote selling. And for LGU intervention, it's 173 out of the 127 out of the 127 reports. You'll get a copy of this presentation, don't worry. And in the village elections, what's good with our election management body is they're innovative, because they also know and they recognize that vote buying is a big problem and it's hard to prosecute. So what our election management body did in the last village elections is to create assumptions. Meaning, it's not the problem of our election management body that to prove that you're guilty of vote buying. If you're caught violating, or if you're caught doing this presumed acts of vote buying and vote selling, it now becomes your responsibility to prove that you're not engaged in vote buying and vote selling. So the number one problem in addressing vote buying and vote selling was transferred to the accused or to the one caught doing this presumed acts of vote buying and vote selling. For example, this is a presumed act. If you're distributing to students during the campaign period, and a local village official was present during this campaign distribution. So what COMELEC did was to make prosecution easier. And that's an innovation that our election management body, good for them, that they managed to do, despite the complaints or the opposition coming, of course, from the candidates and the politicians themselves. Okay, so distributing national government program, but they're distributing it as their own. As you can see, these are boxes of our Ministry of Social Welfare and Development. But these boxes were distributed during the campaign sortie of a local candidate. Bansos, basically, bansos. As you can see, this is a campaign t-shirt of a local candidate, and part of the distribution is the vitamins, the medicines. So the medicines and vitamins were distributed together with the campaign t-shirt of a local candidate. Okay. So COMELEC had this committee on Contrabigay. This was to address vote buying in the Philippines. This was the committee that they created to better address the problem of vote buying in the Philippines. And their modality to better address it is to have a three-pronged approach, or as they say, it's a whole of nation approach. That's our favorite, I think, term now for NGOs, whole of nation. But our government, our election management body also used the whole of nation approach, because they also identified that prosecution is not the only way to solve vote buying. Enforcement is also a way to police the candidates, to warn candidates that they will be disqualified if they use bansos or if they use government resources. And they also engage in a big campaign to better educate the people that vote buying is a problem and it's a crime and they should not engage in vote buying and vote selling. And this is ASR. And what we are doing right now, because we work with this committee, is we want them to integrate ASR in their committee on Contrabigay. We want them to include ASR, or abuse of state resources, in their monitoring of vote buying and vote selling. So what we did is to basically give our COMELEC a revised resolution to include the definition of ASR, presumptions of ASR, and to create a committee on vote buying and ASR. So that's our proposal right now to COMELEC. And we've submitted our reports to COMELEC. This is the commissioner in charge of the Committee on Contrabigay. We've submitted our reports to them and our findings in our last monitoring of ASR in the village elections. We've also included in the proposed resolution additional government agencies that are part of that should be part of monitoring, like our Ministry of Social Welfare and Development, the Ombudsman, the one filing cases against politicians for graft cases. So we included them to be part of the committee on Contrabigay against vote selling, vote buying. Okay. And I just want to end with the good news, because this is good news last night only. Because a big problem right now in the Philippines, and I will end with this, sorry to the Secretary of Perludem. The big problem right now in the Philippines, we have an elections next year. It's an election year next year. And what our parliament did was to transfer billions of pesos and to members of parliament for welfare distribution. So what they did was to decrease the budget of our Ministry of Social Welfare and Development and transfer the budget to the parliament members. So these parliament members can distribute their own social welfare program. So basically, it's, preparing for the elections. Basically, them having resources to distribute to their potential voters. And this is a good, development for us, because it's an ongoing problem in the Philippines right now. And our COMELEC chairperson, our EMB Chairperson Garcia, said that they will closely monitor government agencies exempted from spending ban because they feel that it can be used for ASR. And I just want you to take a look at this paragraph in this press conference of our election chairperson. We have a Contrabigay committee, and we want to look into the abuse of state resources because the government funds should not be used for own interests. Remember when I asked you to Google ASR in Philippine elections? 2022, it just started appearing 2022, and Lente. Somehow, we've managed to convince and inception it in the minds of our Commission on Elections to also use ASR. For them to better address the problem of ASR, not only vote buying, because the kontrabigay was created just for vote buying, but somehow we managed to convince them that include ASR as well, because it's a big problem, just like vote buying in Philippine elections. So that's how we did our ASR work. It's not easy and it's not overnight. We started working in it 2022. Hopefully, we'll see the draft resolution, the revised resolution next month, and we'll be happy to share this revised resolution if we get it next month. The commitment of our election management bodies, they will release this revised resolution on Committee on Kontrabigay and ASR next month to finish with the budget cycle. And if we get it, we'll be happy to share this revised resolution with everyone so that we can all learn from each other on how to better address this problem of ASR in our elections. That's it. I would end with that because my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ona. Give applause to Ona. I realized that based on you share to us, we have a lot of similarity between Philippines and Indonesia. Even though about the boxer become a Senate member, if Philippines have many background, we have Daud Jordan become the Senate member after the 2024 election, and also a lot of bad happen in Philippines, also happen in Indonesia. Like when Ona said, we also have like a budget sent to the Senate member and they can share it to the people. We call it a aspiration budget, right? Because our member of parliament have a aspiration budget, then they can share it to the voters, to the people. So if anyone have a question to Ona, of course, Masahel.
I was expecting that no questions because you were already sleeping.
Okay, sorry, Ona.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Thanks for the wonderful presentation. I'm Sahal from Transparency International Indonesia. I have few questions and probably my question isn't comprehensive. First, as you mentioned that dynasty politics, political dynasty is still a huge problem in Philippines. And like Haikal said before, this is quite similar with Indonesia, even though our condition probably not as worse as in Philippines, but we are getting worse. That's for sure. Do you think the problem of political dynasty is still politically feasible to address, to be reformed in terms of legal framework ways? Not only encourage youngsters to running in election, but to reform from the legal framework. That's my first question. And the second is regarding to ASR. The problem is in Indonesia, why this cannot get punished and the law enforcement cannot be effective. It's because as Ferry Amsari said yesterday, police involved in distribute social assistance. So what's the case in Philippines? Is this also the case, or probably Philippines have better condition which for instance police didn't involve in distribute social assistance? That's my question, Rona. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Masahel. Do you want to gather it or?
Is it okay if I answer the two questions right away?
Okay.
Thank you for the two questions from our friend from Transparency International. To answer the first question, yes, I think it's possible, but you need to start small. Because you really can't change the whole government overnight, and they really don't want to change it because it's further advantage. So what's happening in the Philippines? We have an anti-dynasty prohibition, but for our village elections, for our youth elections, because there is a sangguniang kabataan or a youth council in our village government unit. So there is village officials, there are village officials, but counterpart to these village officials are youth officials. So in our Sangguniang Kabataan Reform Law, or our Youth Village Officials Law, there is an anti-dynasty prohibition that you can't run for the village elections as an SK candidate or Sangguniang Kabataan if you have a relative within the second degree of consanguinity or affinity in the government. So if you're related to the president down to the village captain, then you can't run in the SK. So that's one small reform that can address the problem of dynastic politics or political dynasties in the legal framework. But it's a small framework, but at least there's an existing provision. And this provision, fortunately, was copied in the Bangsamoro Electoral Code. In the list of nominees for regional parliamentary political parties, the nominees should not be related to each other within the fourth degree of consanguinity or affinity. So they copied the prohibition in our SK reform law. So I think, yes, it's possible, but we need to be realistic about it. We can't implement it for the whole government right away, but we can probably introduce it in, for example, at the local level. But you really can't start at the national and local level at the same time, because it will not be realistic and it will not be politically feasible. For your second question, in our distribution of social welfare programs, the police is not involved. It's only the ministry involved which distributes the program or the social welfare. For example, for the poor, so it's the Ministry of Social Welfare and Development. For laborers, it's the Ministry of Labor and Employment. And the police does not have any role in the distribution of these programs. The politicking comes in the form of the list of beneficiaries sometimes come from the local government officials or from our members of parliament. So that's how the distribution of social welfare programs is politicized in the Philippines. The police is not involved, but our members of parliament and the local government politicians are the ones making the list of beneficiaries so that these programs will be distributed to these beneficiaries. So that's how politicking works in our social welfare programs. I hope I managed to answer those two questions, but we can talk during lunch.
Okay, thank you, Ona. Anyone else or want to? Okay.
Check. Good morning. My name is Eka. I'm an intern from Terlebih. And
Interns are not allowed to ask questions. Joke lang, Eka.
Okay.
It's a joke, Eka. No. Answer your question. Please answer your question.
Okay. To begin with, I am quite hooked with your introduction at the beginning of your presentation about the political apathy among the youth in Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
And in my point of view, it's also a similarity here in Indonesia. And in my point of view also, the political apathy has something to do with the political education among the youth, whether it's in the school or in their social environment. Well, my question is, how does Lante see this problem in terms of the political education among youth? Because there must be a link between political apathy and the problem with the ASR, as you mentioned before. And the second question, how does
maintain or keep pushing those issues to the surface? Thank you.
Thank you for the 2 questions, Echo. Those are hard questions. And Biza will answer. If you saw Biza in some of the pictures, before she was part of Lende. That's why she's good. Yes. But to answer your questions, Echo, I think for the first question, the political families, they're getting old. So the old guards are being replaced by the new guards, but basically part of the same family. But what we're banking on in the Philippines is these new guards are the ones educated, especially in big Western schools, in schools in America, schools in Europe, and they get that governance works more. It becomes more effective in the country. So what we're doing in the Philippines is not to close our doors to these political dynasties, because they're slowly evolving as well, from old guards to the new guards. So we work with them as well, these young people, but part of the dynasties. Because it's the reality in Philippine politics that political dynasties won't be removed overnight. They will still be part of the election and politics in my generation and probably in the next generation. But what you can do about it in the meantime is to work closely with the new guards. Because these new guards, yes, they're part of the family, but they're also educated. They've studied, they know more the issues, hopefully, so we can also convince them that you have and you've got a good life already. So you might as well push for more policies for the people and not only for the interest of your family or your local constituents. So that's one strategy that we do. There is a recognition that there are young Filipinos part of political dynasties, so we need to work with these young Filipinos, young politicians, part of the dynasties. But to convince more people, it's also, you need to recognize that not everyone else would want this kind of life or would want this kind of work. So you need to reach out to those who are really active in the space. Fortunately, we have youth development offices in our local government units that we can make use of, that we can partner with, so that we can reach out to these Filipinos who are still wanting to be more active in the local government or engaging politically. As to your second question, we make use of TikTok because to reach out to young people, they don't like events like this. Parang they won't listen to us 1 minute or 2 minutes. Probably nobody listened to my session for the past 30 minutes from the young people. But what we do to laymanize our problem on ESR, our work on ESR, is to make use of the online platforms like TikTok, like X or Meta. We're venturing into TikTok. I don't know TikTok. I'm just a new user of TikTok. I just installed TikTok a few days ago because it will be a big part of our work for the elections next year. So we're evolving like that as well. We really can't stay in the old platforms like Meta, like YouTube. We need to be present in the young platforms as well, or the new platforms, to reach out to people like you, Echo. Thank you, Echo. I hope I answered your 2 questions.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Anyone else? Maybe we can have one last question before we move to the next session. Yeah.
Well, Heroic, you're not allowed to ask a question. You're part of the secretariat. Niniso?
Just quick questions. You mentioned that there is also vote buying.
Yes.
It's part of the ESR. It means vote buying, the monies come from the state or come from the individual candidate budget?
If it comes from the state, we consider it ESR, but if it comes from the private pockets of the politicians and the candidates, then we consider it as vote buying, vote selling. So there's actually a fine line in our legal framework between vote buying and ESR. ESR is basically government resources, government money, government funds, and government personnel.
Okay. I think it's enough. Actually, I have also a question, but I think moderator is not allowed to question right now. So I think I can ask you on the lunch session, yeah. Okay, thank you, Ona. You can back to your seat.
Thank you.
Give
Thank you.
applause to Ona for the mentoring. So the next session will be led by my friend Anissa Alfat. We are also the young researcher from Prolegnas, like Mas Oik said before. So Anissa, this is your time.
Thank you, Haikal. Should I go here? Can you see me? Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. Okay. I believe that we're still excited to hear and sharing another perspective about elections. And it's because we have a few speakers who will share about the opinion and thoughts and also the experiences about elections in many countries. And for the next sessions, we have the executive director from ANFREL. It's Asia Network for Free and Fair Elections. And she will talk about the experiences about the violations and also the malpractices in elections in Asia. And without any further ado, please welcome Briza Rosales.
Thank you, Anissa. Good afternoon. My promise is to finish before lunch and to make it on time. You know, one thing I also realize, because everyone introduces ANFREL as Asian Network for Free and Fair Elections. Now we realize there's no fair in ANFREL. And now, actually, it's a thought right now why there's no fair in the meaning of ANFREL. So yeah, that's ANFREL. So Asian Network for Free Election, and there's no fair. So it's not free and fair. But anyway, I am Briza Rosales, the Executive Director of ANFREL. Just like what Ona shared, I came from Lente. So just to introduce as well, ANFREL. So ANFREL is a regional election observer group. We are based in Bangkok. So technically, ANFREL is a member-based organization, and we are housing 28 members across 18 countries. So I'm actually personally happy to be with Brazil, Perludem, Lente, and JPPR. I've seen Randy yesterday. So those are the members of ANFREL. And just like what I said, before I transferred to ANFREL, I worked for Lente for 12 years, and my heart and soul will be forever Lente. Persona. Anyway, so that's ANFREL. And actually, just to share, we just finished observing the elections of Sri Lanka, working with our members as well in Sri Lanka, like PAFREL and CMEV, and involving our younger generation also, considering them as international observers. Okay, we have 4 programs, just like a brief introduction. So we do international election observation. So apart from the efforts, expertise of different members across our member, so let me just fix it. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So apart from what we do, international election observation, so actually ANFREL has observed 79 elections since 1997 across 18 countries. So probably the sound system is not working. So let me, yeah. It's one way of telling me to have a lunch already. Yeah, so that's international election observation. Just like what I mentioned, ANFREL has observed 79 elections already. And we've seen a lot, and we were criticized a lot also before And at the same time, we continue to evolve. That's one important thing in this regional space. You need to evolve, you need to adopt, you need to collaborate, especially with election management bodies. Because as ANFEL do our work, we cannot observe elections, especially that we respect the sovereignty of a particular country. If you are not invited, or if we volunteered ourselves to observe the elections and we are welcomed by a particular country, so actually that's glory on the part of the organization. Second is capacity building. Capacity building on what? So capacity building with regard to youth. So producing more young democracy advocates, producing more younger election observers, and capacity building among civil society organizations to help build expertise, to adopt current methodologies on how to better improve election observation. Because as you know, in different countries, when you work with different countries, you need a unique methodology as well, which will fit in a particular legal framework of a particular country. Because you cannot do or impose a particular methodology wherein the particular legal framework of that country will not recognize your work. So you need to adopt and study. So whenever we enter a country, you need to thoroughly study the legal framework. Because you don't want to be accused of having foreign influence or interference, but at the same time, you need to be balanced. You need to be non-partisan in your work. So that's capacity building. Part also of the capacity building work of ANFEL is capacity building on developing a team or pool of electoral analysts. So whenever we deploy missions, so that's one of the actually critical part. Who will be the analyst on this particular mission? Because you need expertise. So that's part of the capacity building. In campaigns and advocacy, this is the never-ending task. So without mission or with mission, campaign and advocacy, it should be continued. So with regard to campaigns and advocacy, it is focused on campaigns, especially on restrictive environment. Countries where shrinking civic spaces are very apparent, where problem, or for example, we cannot freely enter the country or international observers are not welcome, and at the same time, not only for international election observers, but also what is the status for the civil society organization or domestic election monitors. Because the restrictions are being imposed with regard to freedom of movement, freedom of expression, speech, freedom of assembly and association. So that's the very basic problem with regard to restrictive environment. So that's one aspect that we continue to advocate to expand and here those domestic election monitors belonging on that restrictive environment countries. And part of the campaigns and advocacy is on electoral reforms. On our part, there's a limitation because our mandate is limited to international election observation and to share as well our findings. But working along with member and partner organizations, that's what makes electoral reforms possible. Because after each mission, so we present our recommendations as well to the duty bearers. Who are the duty bearers? The government, the members of the parliament, the members of the commissioners of the election management bodies, and to work along with your member organizations. So just like what I am doing right now, that's why it is very timely as well, because electoral reform actually globally, this is one of the aspects that every civil society organizations globally is advocating, building on expertise, sharing experiences because it differs. Every electoral reform experience is very unique in different countries. So that's why this forum is very timely, and we are very fortunate enough to hear reform experiences coming from our neighbors. So lastly, outreach and communication. So this is one way of reaching out to our target audiences. So we exist as a regional organization. So it's very hard, actually, to customize your communication and to customize your content for a particular country. Because right now, actually, we're also trying to evolve. When I assumed the position, everything in Anfield is very traditional. So right now, we're still evolving on how to reach out to more younger stakeholders or how to make your message very, very effective. Because you also need to balance with regard to a particular integrity or formalities, especially you are existing as a regional organization. But right now, we're trying to evolve to be more present in social media, but at the same time, trying to conduct more visits in particular country, and in order to recognize Anfrel, and at the same time, produce more knowledge products. In outreach and communication, there's one program there, we called it Media Fellowship. Because the aspect in Media Fellowship, one important thing is on how the media reports election. So we train journalists, media, in order to make their reports systematic and data-driven as well, and how to read reports coming from an election monitoring organization. Because in NGO, our reports are always very long. There's no NGO report that is that long. So we're trying to give media toolkits and media brief for them to digest it more and to report it effectively. So that's one way on how to work with the media efficiently as well. Okay, so enough of the introduction of our organization. So let me go right now to the components of my presentation. But most of it will be focused on the current trends and challenges, especially that 2024 is a super election year. In April, of course, we were not able to observe all of the elections because it's costly. And we are trying to, survive this election year because a lot of things happened. And the challenge of the organization, challenge and at the same time opportunity. The challenge is on how to crunch this data and information coming in through right in front of your door or your laptops, because it's already there. And the opportunities for us to learn as well in different countries. So in this super election year, of course, nearly half of the global population participated in the super election year. And as you can see, in these facts and figures, almost 73 number of national elections were held. And in this super election year, we are fortunate to see the elections here in Indonesia and to continue campaigns and advocacy in Bangladesh. In India, we are not able to observe elections because India do not welcome international election observers. But we have a member there who consistently observe the trends and challenges in their country. In Pakistan, we were not able to observe this election. But these numbers actually show that these are the biggest elections that happened for this 2024 super election year. And to highlight, I will not go through one by one because I will speak more of what happened in 3 countries. But these are just our reflections on what happened just this super election year for India and Japan, wherein there's a retained power with reduced majority signaling widespread dissatisfaction with economic management. Here in Indonesia, I will talk about more with regard to the findings of the mission. In Sri Lanka, we've managed to observe the presidential and the parliamentary elections this September and November of this year. And we've seen actually a transformative story of Sri Lanka wherein they were able to elect. We still need to see what will happen on the newly elected president, but this election is very transformative in a way that people are asking for change and accountability. Because of the economic instability, the issues on governance, so that's the main issues called by the people during this 2024 elections. So that's also there's also in Pakistan, wherein the return to the polls was marred by allegations of military interference and media suppression. More on, yes, in Cambodia, as you know, when the opposition party was dissolved by last year, 2023, and they have their Senate elections this year. So the power has been transferred to the son following the last year's parliamentary elections. So we've also seen the elections in Taiwan and in Bangladesh. Another story that we need to see and hear. And at the same time, the elections for South Korea and Maldives. Okay, so let me talk about, at least focus on the Southeast Asia, or at least on the ASEAN part. So just like Kohin has mentioned, we actually did not see any democratic story for the past 20 to 30 years, and that's true. So gains are not always permanent. And in the past 20 years and so, Southeast Asia has gone through a phase where democracy first started to stall and before starting to decline around 2014. So there's no so much good story in Southeast Asia right now. But yeah, the third wave of democratization happened in mid-70s up to 80s when it comes to Southeast Asia. Just like in, for example, in the Mekong region, Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos, what's the most common trend in this country? So it's semi to highly authoritarian right now, and we cannot freely enter the country when it comes to the issues on elections and human rights, except for tourism, of course. We can. Well, others, for Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste is the only one country probably that has been the most democratic country in Southeast Asia since independence. So that's one among the countries in Southeast Asia. So let me talk about the story of Thailand. So don't take photos when I discuss this particular story, especially that when coup happened in 2014, so the elections happened 2 years after the 27th Constitution was passed and ratified. So 2019 elections, Alfred was lucky and fortunate to see the elections of Thailand during the 2019 election, and Alfred was able to deploy 34 international observers. So in this mission, actually, every election in Thailand, it's very orderly and peaceful. Every election day. And in the legal framework of Thailand, advanced voting has been their strength. Because in advanced voting, they were able to cater all of the classes of voters. And you can vote a week before the election day. But what happened during the 2019, as you've seen, we called 2019 Thai general election as a missed opportunity for democracy. So why? Actually, during the Thai general election, Thai authorities did ultimately fulfill their promise to hold an election, but they failed to establish a healthy political climate that lies at the heart of free and fair electoral process. Why? What was the electoral environment that time? Actually, the electoral processes, there were openings for people to assemble, have debates, discuss their views openly, but there were still a lot of restrictions with regard to legal framework and the media and civil society spaces. So actually it added to the condition on a very controlled environment, hindering the effects of the effort, just like what happened in the 2014 coup. There were also reported instances of rampant vote buying, and just like what the mission saw, there was a concern also, or it was very concerning to saw the use of government resources during the campaign. However, during the 2023 elections, this election, I was able to see clearly because I was involved in this mission. Actually, we've seen the Thai general election evolve, coming from that call during the 2019 election that it was not free and fair at all, and it was a missed opportunity for democracy. But the 2023 Thai general election, there was a showing of improved accountability, transparency, inclusivity, and at the same time, there was a general public confidence with regard to the acceptance of the election results. Why ponder on the electoral results? Because the issue during the 2019 elections, no one can see the tabulation. We can see the counting in the polling stations. You can able to witness actually the counting because it's very transparent, and the reconciliation is very systematic. But you cannot see the tabulation. You can just see what's happening in the polling station. But during the 2023 elections, the Election Commission of Thailand developed this ECT report. It provided results that were very timely, accurate, and easily accessible, and I can attest to that. But however, the restriction lies still that the actual tabulation center, you cannot enter. So political parties, media, election observers cannot enter on the tabulation centers. So that's still the problem when it comes to Thailand elections. Next, of course, the ultimate story, it always happened after election with regard to the story of Thailand when the Constitutional Court ordered the dissolution of the Progressive Election Winning Move Forward Party before its future forward. So actually, those are the stories or the questions who will be the next Prime Minister. But right now, the Sinawatra is back, and the Pheu Thai Party is one of the leading political parties in Thailand right now. And critics are telling that Thailand is like this with regard to meaning of democracy in this country. So you can just read it. So I have searched it online with regard to what the analysts are saying with regard to Thailand and democracy. Okay, second story with regard to Indonesia. Then after that, I will consolidate what were the trends and challenges. We are also fortunate enough to see what happened during the Indonesia election. We managed to deploy a small team. It's not big because resources are always the challenge when it comes to deploying mission. So we've published the report already. It's in the website. It's titled Upholding the Rule of Law Amid Democratic Adversities, because we've seen actually the main problem is the implementation of the law. It's existing, but the implementation is very flawed. So actually, there are a lot of potentials when it comes to Indonesian democracy. And yeah, we were accredited. Yes, thank you to Maslu. Thank you for inviting Anfel. So these were the objectives of the mission. And this is the team who were deployed during the mission, and we've managed to visit 113 polling stations during election day, and managed to interview a lot of stakeholders before the election day, because we've entered during the campaign period already. And actually, during the assessment, we said that the election was free, but it's not fair. It's not fair because we've seen so much issues when it comes to the legal framework, especially on the Constitutional Court's judgment on the minimum age requirement to run for presidential election. So it posted a lot of legal uncertainty. Second is the misuse of state resources. So the current legal framework lacks the necessary provisions to effectively address instances of misuse of state resources in elections. Actually, I can still vividly remember, because when the time we entered the mission, there were a lot of calls to halt the distribution of the direct cash assistance, the BLT and the BANSOS that time. There were a lot of calls coming from civil society organizations, think tanks and the academy. And then, one issue also surfaced during the election period with regard to independence of KPU, with regard to the multiple occasions due to the actions perceived as biased and incompetent by both political parties and the CSOs. Another is pervasiveness of mis- and disinformation, because it has been the trend across Southeast Asia on how to curb effectively the rise of disinformation and influence operations, especially that it is not an EMB problem alone. It's actually the problem of everyone. So it goes beyond elections. And what's more hurting is sometimes it produces gender-based violence or discrimination. So yeah, that's for Indonesia. And with regard to Philippines, Ona has already mentioned about the problems. And although we have still, I've called it a vibrant democracy during the 2022 election. But yeah, the biggest flaw in Philippine election is the prevalence of vote buying, vote selling, and abuse of state resources in elections. It's really political corruption. Actually, if you're following the trend right now, the issue with regard to budget approval, critics are telling that this is the most corrupt budget process in the Philippine election history. And it's actually keep rising, or it's being the trend right now, especially that elections will happen by next year. So one aspect also with regard to the problem still existing in the Philippines is with regard to campaign finance. Imagine our campaign finance law was passed in 1991, so it is being implemented for about 30 years now, and there's only one case that has been successful, disqualifying a candidate because of the violation of the campaign finance law. So compared it to, for example, in Sri Lanka, the campaign finance law of Sri Lanka has been passed just last year. So Sri Lanka has the full potential and hope, comparing to the Philippines, who has managed to implement it for 34 years already. But we've also seen the loopholes with regard to the campaign finance law implemented in Sri Lanka this year. So going back to the Philippines, when our election commission promulgated the Committee on Contrabigay, so they have highlighted the problems with regard to poverty, political clientelism, and all of this listed, especially one aspect with electoral system, voter expectation and enforcement. So those were the problems being rooted why vote buying is very prevalent in the Philippines. And right now, of course, one aspect also is the sowing distrust against democratic institutions. The erosion of trust always stem because this process actually is being conducted in a very legal manner. So that's why the trust on democratic institutions is our problem right now. And not only in Philippines, actually. That's the trend in the region. And the battle for 2028 still continues as Duterte and the Marcos are clashing with each other. Especially on the left, as you can see, they're very happy. It's a unity team during the 2022 elections. But 3 years or 2 years after what's happening right now, there are, you know, they are a sad girl and sad boy with regard to Philippines right now. And that's the face of Philippines. Whenever we meet new people, they're always asking, is it true that Duterte threatened Marcos that she will kill President Marcos? So yeah, we need to explain that. Actually, it's really hard to explain. And why do we need to explain, right? So yeah, that's the face of Philippines right now. And with all of this, just a short sharing during the Sri Lanka elections. So this is a little bit of a very comprehensive vision because we've managed to see the transition during the presidential election when EKD or Anura Kamara Dissanayake was elected, and then the parliamentary elections eventually followed. So actually, the elections was very peaceful and orderly during the parliamentary elections, but during the presidential election, where there is an incumbent, we've seen the problem on abuse of state resources, and that's very, very prevalent when it comes to the presidential elections. And the media bias was also a problem during the presidential elections. And look at this. This is one report coming from TI Sri Lanka, where a candidate used 2 helicopters owned by Sri Lankan Air Force to use for security. So that's one way of monitoring ASR systematically, wherein you target those resources produced by in a coercive manner, financial manner, or those very tangible, which is easy to monitor. Let me jump on this. Yeah. So with regard to these stories that I have shared and mentioned, so what were the key issues and challenges across the region right now? You can see in the bubble, the legal tactics and the electoral fairness which target the trust in democracy and institution. So across Asia, we have observed a variety of legal tactics designed to tilt the electoral playing field in favor of the incumbents. And then small adjustment to laws governing electoral oversights, candidates' eligibility, or electoral boundaries. It seemed minor at first, but over time, this add up to the significant shifts that distort voter choice and weaken public trust. Second is the representation within parliaments. So right now the trend is the barriers to true representation, and it extends beyond elections. So actually we see that democratic backsliding often begin with restrictions on parliamentary debates, limitations on opposition participation, and fast-track procedures that bypass thorough review. And number 3, as you can see, the targeting of the opposition and civil society. That's actually a trend right now in the region, wherein we have observed that government often use a blend of legal, judicial, and executive tactics to weaken opposition parties and civil society. And to end, of course, because we are talking about electoral reform, I just wanted to share these 2 normative international documents to guide us whenever we pursue electoral reforms. Because globally, it has been identified when it comes to election, the main problem, aside from we have seen across the region, it's the independence of EMB. And at the same time, how to pursue electoral reform effectively. So you can scan this QR code, because let's join hand in hand on how to promote these documents and use this as well whenever we do our work. And at the same time, this has been amplified through the Asian Electoral Stakeholder Forum that we are being conducted. So the last ASF, as we call it, it happened in Nepal last year, wherein electoral reform was one of the main core focus on how to pursue electoral reforms in different countries and in your country where you work. And lastly, actually this is one of the examples, because just like what happened in Bangladesh, just this October, they have their interim government, and the interim government has created a lot of reform commissions right now. And there's a huge opening or opportunity on how to participate and how to lobby or how to institutionalize the reforms that you want to do, especially that you have produced mission reports all along your journey in observing the election. So this is a good opportunity for us. We're actually lobbying, recognizing the legal framework when it comes to citizen observation. So to make it legally recognized in a particular country, because the issue in Bangladesh before is deploying fake observers, and those observers coming from the government. So it's not coming from a non-partisan group or human rights organization. So it adds on destroying the credibility of citizen observation. Yeah, actually that's the end of my slide. And thank you again for listening, and I'm very happy to share and entertain some questions if you have.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Briza. Thank you so much for the insightful presentations. And we have the same cases, I guess, from the local elections actually, and it's we can learn about the cases from Thailand. So there are limited or eliminations about data tabulations, and it happened to in Indonesia in elections commissions eliminate the data tabulations here at the local elections. And I also highlighted a little bit about the Briza presentations here. There are some cases in elections commissions and also the general elections in Indonesia. There are misuse of state resources, also the independency of KPU, and also how to handle the disinformations and also misinformations. And that's all. Any questions from the participants?
They're hungry already.
Okay, we have one.
Mabuhay, Briza.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Just following up the summary from the moderators, we would like to learn more about the tabulations, the one they use in Thailand, because we have over 800,000 polling stations across Indonesia, and I think we use jaga suara itu di level apa ya, Ruk, ya? Kemarin?
Jaga suara is national.
Semua ya?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. But we would like to learn more about because you mentioned that is also showing the data from the polling stations. Thank you.
You want to answer it?
Yeah, I will answer right away.
Okay.
Actually, it's like whenever they receive in the tabulation center, it will be automatically uploaded in the website. But actually, there were still a lot of repercussions on that because we cannot see what's happening. And everything or everyone is just relying on what we are seeing in the ECT report. So that's one way that the ECT has improved transparency. When it comes to accuracy, the good thing is that it is accepted. It was fully accepted by the Thais. But of course, on the perspective or in the hat of election observers, the confidence is really hard to grapple because you cannot really observe what's happening in tabulation center, because the principle that we follow is that counting should be available to the public as well. Tabulation wherein political parties, candidates, media, election observers can freely enter and observe. So yeah, actually when it comes to ECT report, I can only say and attest what has been received and perceived by the Thais. On what actually happened with regard to tabulation, actually we really don't know. Yeah.
So, is there any questions? Oh, okay. It's from...
Yeah, thank you. Just only one quick question. Because you observed Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, and also the Sri Lanka, right? As we know, despite Indonesia, the other country doesn't have election oversight body. So, what do you think about the effectivity of Indonesia election oversight body? Because they have authority to handle every election violations, but as we discussed yesterday, they doesn't have enough to handle any election violations. But in other countries, the electoral malpractice violations comes to the police or to the elections commissions. So what do you think about this different country to handle election violations?
Actually, Indonesia and Philippines, although in the Philippines, we don't have independent, just like Bawaslu, or separate. In Sri Lanka, the one pursuing cases are the police and the attorney general. With regard to, it's a very tricky question. I would focus on what we have written in the report. The problem is on the capacity in providing updates on the cases being taken by the Bawaslu. We've managed to see all of the cases, at least on the files that we have received and retrieved coming from them. But the problem is providing real-time updates, what's happening on the cases. Because the best practice is you provide updates on the cases that you have received, that this cases is being heard right now. This is how the cases are being resolved and tried by a particular case, a particular court. For example, we've seen that kind of update, for example, in Philippines. Actually, this is only the first time that we've seen that kind of update. Because in the past, we are not seeing any kind of updates with regard to reports received by election management body, civil society organization. But taking a look on that, that's very important because that's the principle of accountability. Looking at the trend right now when it comes to accountability mechanisms, just like what happened in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, it boomed right away because there's no accountability coming from government and the economic stability is very much hurting. That lead them to protest and active protest which made them resign. Which made the resignation of the head of that countries. So accountability is important. And with regard to your question, there's a lot of improvement that Bawaslu needs to take when it comes to taking up cases because that's accountability. You need to give justice to those who made the reports very, accurately, to those persons who are sacrificing themselves, giving affidavits. Because the problem when it comes to producing more pieces of evidence is you are requiring a lot of personal efforts to that person. And that the security, the confidence to pursue the case is very important when it comes to building up a case. So yeah.
Thank
and
you.
it's recorded. Yeah.
It's streaming. It's live streaming.
It's okay. We managed to present the report to Bawaslu. Yeah. And we managed to give the report to them.
Okay. So is there any questions? Once more, I guess, before we get lunch. Okay, I think they are hungry. Okay, so thank you, Briza, for the insightful presentations. Give applause to Briza. Okay. Thank you for all the participants. We will back here again for the next sections. We have Mas Yos, and also the last is our recommendations from all of the events, today's events, and we'll be back here after 1 hour after the lunch. And please having your lunch. Thank you.